Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor Hill-Kashuabara, and I'm excited to be here today for this wonderful panel, and really honored, especially after hearing all of the presentations today that were so wonderful from all of the youth writers. So it's an honor to be here. And we only have about 30, 40 minutes, so we're just going to jump right in. And I'd like to start with introducing our panelists. Our first panelist is Desiree Basile, and she hails from Maplewood, New Jersey, but moved to Portland in 2016. And in her life, Desiree has overcome abuse, abandonment by her biological father, PTSD, bullying, depression, and coming out as a member of the LGBT plus community. She works full-time at Youth Era and is a trainer for peer counselors, but also works with Wraparound and Peer Plus, doing trainings for youth peer support. She also created Adulting IRL, which is called #IRL and contracted through Portland Public Schools. Welcome, Desiree. And I also have to share that when we were connecting around this panel, we realized that we were both from the same community in New Jersey, and we actually both graduated from the same high school. So I feel a bond, and I've only recently met Desiree, so it's really lovely to have that connection, in addition to our passion for youth mental health. So welcome to the panel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
And next, we have Dr. Joseph Barron, and Joseph currently works at the Children's Program here in Portland, Oregon, and received his doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin, which is also his hometown where he was born and raised. And there he gained specialized experience and knowledge working in systems of education, outpatient mental health care, residential and milieu care, and engaged in all of this while also conducting community-based participatory research with Spanish-speaking families, which is a form of research where communities and academics and providers work as equal partners to address a community-driven, a community-identified need. And so it's really a culturally responsive model, an activism model for conducting research to propel work within communities. So it's awesome that you were doing that while also working in those care environments. So as in the last few years, in his postdoctoral residency and now as a licensed psychologist, he's been working to support families, workers, and children in the child welfare system. And I had the honor of getting to work with Joseph in a mental health agency setting and got to see his approach in conducting culturally responsive work and really meeting families who are diverse and utilizing approaches that respond to both their mental health needs as well as their cultural values. So welcome, Joseph. And next, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Cohen, who is a West Sylvan school counselor, West Sylvan Middle School in Portland, Oregon. And she went to college at University of Kansas and received a Master's of Science in Special Education from the University of Oregon, and also a Master's of Arts in School Counseling from Pacific University. And she's served as a counselor in a variety of schools over the past 2 decades, including Title I, dual language immersion, private boarding schools, public K through 5 middle schools and high schools, and even as the director of disability for Reed College. I have had the personal pleasure, of knowing Rebecca's work because she was a counselor at my daughter's elementary school a few years ago, and have witnessed her skill with utilizing mindfulness approaches in the classroom and with kids, and the use of those techniques with the kids in the school. And so welcome, Rebecca. It's an honor to have you on the panel as well. So I will get us started, but I first just wanted to share that, again, we really were mindful about choosing panelists from different settings, peer support, mental health agency care, and school, so that, although all of the providers are working with youth and families, they represent different perspectives because of the environments that they interface with and where they see kids. So I'm really excited to get their perspectives. And before we get started, what I'm going to do is ask each panelist a question that's really specific to their area, but I want to make sure that we also hopefully have time to get response or questions from the audience answered. And so for those of you who are watching live stream, you can also participate in submitting a question by putting your question into the comments box, and then someone from our MediaRites team here will make sure if there's time, that we have the opportunity to answer your questions as well as in the audience too. I think there are cards floating around, and you can provide DMA with your question if you have one, and we'll do our best in the time we have to answer some of those questions. That being said, our hope today, as you could see from all of the wonderful works that were presented, is for this audience, for our audience, the youth and families, to come away with a feeling of hope, a feeling that it's important to talk about mental health so that we can destigmatize mental health, and for everyone to know that there are resources, there are tools, and that is our hope, is that by having this panel and this opportunity to talk with our provider panel, that there is some sense of what is available and some sense of hope and the feeling that you're not alone. And so with that, we'll get started, and I want to provide my first question to Desiree. I'm going to move my mic closer. Desiree, or Des, I want to ask you, as we noticed in our pieces today, we had some youth bring up suicide, the importance about talking about suicide and how we talk about suicide behaviors and thinking, and that was something in our panel preparation talk. We talked with Des about the fact that that's something that Des has had a lot come up with the youth that she works with, and as a youth peer counselor, trainer rather. So I would, counselor and trainer. So I would love to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about some of the tools you provide in your peer counselor trainings related to helping young people engage in healthy wellness practices and strategies that allowed them to work through difficult experiences, including suicidal thoughts and behaviors.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eleanor. So I think the biggest and best strategy that we have as peer counselors is providing a holistic view of what's really going on with our young folks that are coming into our services. So we try to not only look at just the mental health aspect, but their whole overall wellness, and we approach it from a standpoint of every behavior is stemming from an unmet need that these young people are having. So we really work to talk with them around figure out what that unmet need is, and then if we can provide them with alternatives on how to meet that need in a way that's healthier for them, then eventually these self-harming behaviors and suicide behaviors will end. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. That being said, at Adulting IRL specifically, we have our #IRL series, which teaches young folks how to embrace their authentic selves. And we do that by, first of all, helping them connect to their identity, who they are, and understanding that who they are is all that they need to know, and that's all that really matters, and they don't have to conform to what society expects them to be. And from there, we teach them how to heal from different types of trauma that they may have. And we teach them, how to really flip the script on some of those negative and intrusive thoughts that get into their brains that tells them that they aren't worthy. We teach them how to do the opposite and start to have more positive self-image and more positive self-love language. And then once we have done that step with them, we then teach them that they are worth being taken care of. So we teach them how to do intentional self-care and wellness practices, not just your typical, I feel down, so I'm going to take a bubble bath, but really exploring their feelings language and what they need depending on what feeling they're feeling. And once we get them to a point where they feel like they can have that self-awareness, that self-love back in their lives and rebuild their strength and power, we then put the cherry on top by teaching them how to set realistic, achievable goals, how to have conversations in a collaborative way so that if something's coming up for them, they have the language to be able to say, this is what's happening for me, and this is what I need in this moment. And I've been doing that program in the Portland Public School for 2 years now. Wow. And this will be our third coming up. And it's gotten so big that they eventually asked us to make a parent guide to help their students, parents now be able to reinforce some of these lessons at home. And the other thing that we decided to do to help young people is we recognize that young people are hearing first from their friends when they're having thoughts of suicide and suicide behaviors or self-harming. So I'm an ASSIST trainer. ASSIST stands for Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And so I adapted that training to create a training specifically for youth and young adults to be able to learn how to do a first aid suicide intervention with their friends so that they can keep safe for now and then get in contact with your therapists and your school counselors and things like that. Because that's been the number one ask is, how do I help my friends? So I ended the gatekeeping and say, this is how you do it.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I'm familiar with that ASSIST training and often was used with teachers and adults, but I think it's incredible that it's been expanded to use with peers because I think exactly a lot of times peers are learning from their friends about their suicidal ideation. So I believe that this information is linked in the toolkit, but if it's not, I'm sure that we will make sure that our audiences have that information. And thank you, Desiree. That's really wonderful work that you're doing. I'm going to just, since we want to hear from all of our panelists as well, this is really great. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you a question next. As a school counselor, and since you're based in the school setting, can you share about the resources available to kids at school? I know that some of our youth writers talked about, what's available or not available at school. How can kids get help at school and feel supported?
We have so many more resources than we ever have had in schools. I mean, Des just talked about that resource, but we have school social workers, we have volunteers coming in, and then we have like a big rise in affinity groups and clubs, and really we're trying to wrap around students in a way that so no one feels alone. So like in my school, we have started a 5-day-a-week advisory program where students will get social emotional learning, but also be able to connect with their peers, like you said, about some of the things that are happening for them, and talk about their identity, talk about who they are, talk about mental health. We celebrate Mental Health Awareness Week. We really are trying to open it up so that every student in a school feels seen and heard and loved. And I can speak for myself, and I walk into a room with 200 counselors in Portland Public Schools, and I can promise that it is the most loving space I know. Like our social workers, our school psychologists, all of the care people want to help youth. And so there's that and beyond, because we also make a ton of referrals. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And I think, I don't know if this is new, but I think there's also the ability to connect kids with therapy in the schools now?
We have therapists in our schools. Not only that, but we will also, since the pandemic, provide space so that if a student has a mental health provider that they're seeing online, we will provide space for them. Like there is no end to what we will do to help a student. And we go into classrooms right at the beginning of the year and talk about mental health and suicide awareness so that every child knows that if they hear it from a friend, there's people to talk to. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And my next question is for you, Joseph. As a provider in a mental health agency, can you share about therapy, the benefits of therapy, and also what goes into finding a therapist? I know some people use the term therapy shopping, and some of our writers have talked about their experiences in therapy and the importance of either connecting to a therapist who's a good fit culturally or otherwise. So anything that you can tell us about therapy and fit of a therapist. We know that there is much more need for diversity among therapists, and so if that's not available, how can a youth feel a connection?
I really appreciate that I'm going third because, I think mental health is so many things. And of course, you do have the community resource piece, and then you have the school collective piece. And so the therapy part is really the individual work, right? So that's the once a week or once a month or twice a month moment where you're connecting with another adult and you're having an opportunity to be heard and listened to. And the great thing about therapy is that there's so many different kinds of therapy and different orientations, different theoretic modalities. And so it is beautiful to be able to find the person that speaks to your needs. And there's some therapists that do more talking and build more insight and take more of a long-form approach. And there's some therapists that do more behavioral work, so they're actually going to have you go do things, and they're going to assign homework and some sort of thought reviewing and really connecting with you on week-to-week kinds of actions and objectives that you're trying to work through. And some therapists are just going to be delving into your past, into your dreams, into things that are not clear. And all of that is great because you get to decide what kind of therapist works for you. And your parents can go alongside you with those sessions, and sometimes there's family work to be done. And so it's really a beautiful opportunity to be able to work through things through a variety of modalities. And Eleanor, I think you're totally right. There is a difficulty sometimes with especially youth of color, youth with disabilities, to find therapists that do specialize in their particular backgrounds or know how to broach the conversation of race. And I think the reality is a lot of therapists aren't trained in that, and they don't have that sort of background in their training programs, depending on what city they were in or what was the or orientation or ideas in those graduate programs. But I think it's about us as a community also being able to talk to the therapist, and we can even directly ask. You have the right to ask, what is your stance on this or that? Are you BIPOC affirming? Are you LGBTQ affirming? How much work have you done with people on the spectrum? And I think all those are valid questions, and as therapists, we need to be ready to provide the correct response and then provide the right type of technique and engagement for those youth.
Thank you. I'm just looking at my watch to be mindful of the time that we have left. I don't know if any questions have come forth. I have other questions, but I just wanted to give the audience a chance. I know that if there are, if not, I can ask my next questions. Or even on the YouTube, on the virtual. If not, I have more questions. Okay, I will go ahead and ask my next questions. So I also had some questions around, I guess since Joseph, you just spoke, maybe I'll kind of go in reverse here and start with you. To add to what you were just talking about, do you have anything to share with the audience around mental health stigma, stigma and how to address that, especially in some communities of color? There may be more, and some of our youth writers spoke to that, just stigma in accessing services or trying to get services. Do you have any things to share with our audience around that?
Yeah, I think it's important to honor that different communities have come to interface with this idea that we call mental health in their own ways. And I always like to bring in the conversation of primary and secondary characteristics here, which is to say a lot of communities of color, primarily we have certain ideas and values and sensibilities, and those are sort of our primary characteristics. And sometimes whenever we come and interact with sort of the wider dominant hegemony, then we start to develop secondary characteristics, which is to say maybe I hide certain things, maybe I don't talk about certain things, maybe I veer away certain things because I need to be strong and put together. And so what I often help my patients engage in is the idea of what were those primary characteristics. So if you're a Latinx person, we actually know that if you delve deep enough into the history, you see tribal leaders, you see different people who were part of indigenous Latin communities doing mental health work with other language. And there's this really wonderful system and charts if you go into sort of the history of what it looked like back then. And so I always encourage people to go back and say, well, even if your community currently seems to disengage with it or mock it or not understand it or feel scared of it, what other stories are in your community that actually point to, no, we've always taken care of ourselves. We found ways to connect and to belong, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's talking with your grandma, whether it's listening to consejos and stories and things like that. What are the ways that we have engaged in mental health, even if we called it something else? So I think that's really important to delve into your roots and the richness there.
Yeah, I love that, making that connection, but and just making the connection like we're talking about some of these same things, just using different language or ways of engaging. Wonderful, thank you. And then, Rebecca, I wanted to ask about advocacy and just, is the school, in your opinion, or are you seeing things change around opportunities for mental health advocacy within school?
Absolutely. I see funding changing, and I see our district putting more money towards helping with mental health in schools. And I also see us training up teachers to be able to respond and training our students to be able to respond to each other. So I think that we are very aware about, that the pandemic caused crisis, and I see us bringing in many more services. Like, for example, all of the high schools have a mindfulness class. So that is like, tier 1 on the floor. Like, how can we help, on the court, how can we help kids right from the start gain these skills? So I just see more and more opportunity all the time. I don't know, is that, Janae, is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, definitely. What I'm seeing as well, Portland Public School came to me and said, hey, this is what we're seeing in our schools. We know you do this in the community. Can you bring something like this to us? And there's been a real push to get peer supports, youth peer supports specifically, who have lived experience in navigating a lot of these systems and dealing and going through some of those challenging times that our young people are facing. Portland Public School is saying we need those folks in our schools to be available for our young people to talk to. So if there's one thing I can say is about this school district in particular is that there is a huge focus on mental health and wellness for our young people. And I'm proud to say that I am a part of that.
That's wonderful. Oh.
Can I share one other little thing that I know has happened, that schools are having mental health days at schools where they're bringing in all different types of mental health opportunities, which I think does raise advocacy for students, whether it's like they're teaching kids how to craft or, make things, create writing, have pets. All of the stuff that we bring in also shows to the outside world, like, this is okay, we all need this. We all need this self-care, so.
Wonderful, thank you. I have a question from the audience, so thank you for whoever submitted this question. And I think this could be for anyone on the panel. What do you do to help your friends if you think they need help? So this is, again, that peer-to-peer thing, and I'm sure in all of the environments where experiencing this? Does anyone want to speak to this question?
I guess I will.
Does.
I think the biggest thing you can do for a friend that needs help is to let them know that you are here for them, validate their feelings, because even though you might not know the exact situation or you might not have experienced that exact thing, chances are the feeling that they're feeling, you've experienced it as well. So by first and foremost, just validating that for them and letting them know that they're not alone in that experience will help tremendously. And once they understand that, then that kind of opens up the opportunity for you to say, hey, I'm really concerned because this is not how you normally are. And then you could ask them. And that's one of the things we teach students, especially our older, like middle school and high school students. We actually teach them how to ask if their friend is thinking about suicide, because it's such an awkward question. It's literally the worst question to get a yes to. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety around asking that question. So we teach them how to ask it and what to do if the response is yes. And the first and foremost thing you could do is acknowledge it and say, I hear you, tell me what's going on, and then make a plan with them to keep them safe in that moment until you can connect them to a school counselor or a therapist or an organization like Youth Era where an adult can now take over for you and help get them to where they need to be.
Thank you, Des.
Yep.
I have another question here, and this is in the space of advocacy, so I'm not sure. We'll ask the question and would love to hear anyone's thoughts. Mental health is such a serious issue. Since the pandemic started, Colorado has passed 8 laws regarding mental health. Oregon has passed none. Do you know of any opportunities to get involved with legislators? Looks like
Yes.
Des may.
So yes, there's lots of opportunity locally and throughout the state and even federally. The best opportunity, I would say, is the systems of care. It's where you can go and actually talk to folks who are sending out the money, creating the policy, doing all these things. So you have education is represented, behavioral health, mental health, juvenile justice, intellectual and developmental disabilities, early education. All of these fields who work in collaboration with young people get together once a month at a practice level work group where we identify the needs in the community. And then we get together at a regional advisory where community members and managers and directors of these programs try to figure out how can we meet those needs. And if all else fails, we send it up to what's called the executive council, where the folks with like the money can come in and say, we're going to put X amount of dollars to help solve this problem. So if you want your voice to be heard, the best place to go is to a system of care event.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have 5 minutes left. So I think the next question I wanted to ask, and actually, I know that Desiree, you've been answering some of the audience questions, but this is actually for anyone. I just think because we had a conversation about this, but I think this applies to all of us. In talking with youth about wellness, I know that that was a theme that I saw or I heard as we watched the writings. This idea of wellness as a journey and not kind of a destination. I'd love to hear our panelists' thoughts on wellness and how do we talk to our youth and our families about wellness.
You all want me to go first?
Anyone?
Okay. So what I try to impart on youth about wellness is that it's a lifelong journey. You're never going to stop being well. And so there's going to be times when one part of your life is more well than another part of your life, and that's okay. And what I try to do is help youth learn these skills and develop these skills so that when one part of their life isn't doing so good, they have an opportunity to say, this is what I need to change it, this is what I have to do to fix it. And then they can put an intentional focus on that particular part. But just understanding that it's a lifelong journey that everyone in this room has to take. It's not just you or myself or Eleanor or my lovely panelists here. We all have that journey, and being able to talk about it openly and honestly with our friends and our family members is what makes that journey easier.
I really love this question, because I think when it comes, so the idea of mental health, again, is, as we're trained in our graduate programs, our modern day graduate programs, it really does come from a very empirical Western mindset. But again, when we start turning away from that conversation into sort of more the margins, again, some communities, some indigenous communities, for example, in Canada, don't have like that same sort of paradigm of mental health, but there's a term called being well, right? And that is something that, as humans, is a construct that we can try to tap into and work through. And in my work in therapy, I often have families come in and we'll do like 10 to 20 sessions, and we'll really target something, and then I'll send them out and I'll let them keep going on with your life and connecting with resources in the community or your school supports or other people that really care about you. And if you need more help, then come back and let's do more of the therapy specialization work. But taking care of who you are is something that you do day to day, and you do week to week, and you do in conjunction with family. So being part of a collectivist sort of mindset, myself, I think that is, it's about tapping again into your roots, into the things around you that you love. And I think that is just an ongoing dynamic that helps you grow and to change and transform. And yeah, I love that we're having conversations about being well. I think that's very important.
Thank you. Any thoughts?
I can just add that we start young with our students in schools, kindergarten, right on up, about like the whole student and trying to help them understand, whether it's through eating or exercise or talking to a friend or talking to an adult, all of the parts that make us feel well in the world, gratitude, all of those things, breathing. So we try to start really young, and so that by the time students get older, those are just part of their way of being, and knowing that they can fall back on themselves to really depend on taking care of what's happening inside of them.
Yeah, I love that very holistic mind, body, and community approach to being well. So we could, I'm sure, talk a lot longer, but we're out of time. So I want to close our panel, which I'm sad to close, but all good things have to wrap. I want to make sure again to thank our funders and give a special thank you to Oregon Humanities for providing this forum to discuss these issues for the ISM Youth Project. It's so very important to have these conversations, and thank you. And thank you again to our panel and to our writers. Thank you.